there is a specific kind of exhaustion that no one talks about. It is not the exhaustion of hard work. It is not the exhaustion of loss or grief or physical pain. It is the exhaustion of being the smartest person in a conversation that should have ended 10 minutes ago. You know this feeling intimately. You are sitting across from someone, watching their mouth move, listening to words arrange themselves into a sentence so spectacularly wrong that for a moment you question whether you have misheard them. You have not misheard them. They believe what they are saying. They believe it completely. And the worst part, the part that makes your jaw tighten and your temples pulse, is that they are saying it with the confidence of someone who has never once been corrected in their life. You have tried everything. You have tried being patient, laying out your reasoning step by step, like you are building a staircase for them to climb toward the truth. They did not climb. You have tried being direct, cutting through the noise with clean, sharp facts. They stared at you like you were the problem. You have tried humor, kindness, silence. Nothing works. And every single time you walk away from the interaction feeling like something has been taken from you. Not just your time, something deeper, something closer to your sense of reality. Arthur Schopenhauer felt this. He felt it so acutely, so consistently, that he built an entire philosophical architecture around it. Not an architecture of hope, not a gentle reminder to be patient with others, but a cold, precise, almost surgical framework for understanding why intelligent people keep losing to foolish ones, and more importantly, how to stop. Schopenhauer was not a warm man. He was not the kind of philosopher who believed that deep down all humans are reasonable creatures, waiting to be unlocked with the right argument. He watched people. He watched them argue, manipulate, deceive, and embarrass themselves with breathtaking consistency. And what he concluded was not comfortable. What he concluded was that truth, in most human interactions, is completely irrelevant. Read that again. Truth is irrelevant. Not sometimes, not in edge cases. In most human conversations, the truth of what is being said has almost nothing to do with the outcome of the exchange. What determines the outcome is something far more primitive. It is will. It is ego. It is the raw animal need to not be the person who is wrong in front of other people. Schopenhauer wrote about this with venom in his text on heuristic dialectics, what he called the art of being right, a manual not for finding truth, but for understanding how people fight to avoid it. He catalogued 38 strategies that people use, consciously or not, to win arguments regardless of whether they deserve to win. And the most devastating insight buried inside that work is this. The fool does not need to be right. The fool only needs to never admit that they are wrong. This is the trap that intelligent people fall into over and over again. You enter a conversation believing that it is a collaborative search for truth. You believe that both parties are operating in good faith, that evidence matters, that logic is a shared language. It is not. You are walking onto a chessboard expecting your opponent to follow the rules of chess, and they are playing an entirely different game. A game with no rules. A game where the only objective is to not lose face. And in that game, your intelligence is not a weapon, it is a liability. Here is why. The moment you present a well-reasoned argument to someone who is not equipped to process it, something happens in their brain that has nothing to do with reason. Their identity feels threatened, not their idea, their identity. Because for people who have never developed the habit of separating what they believe from who they are, an attack on their belief is an attack on their existence. Daniel Kahneman mapped this in extraordinary detail. He showed us that the human mind operates in two distinct modes. System 1 is fast, automatic, emotional. It is the part of your brain that makes snap judgments, that feels before it thinks, that mistakes familiarity for truth. System 2 is slow, deliberate, effortful. It is the part that follows logic, weighs evidence, considers alternatives. Most people live almost entirely in System 1. They feel something strongly, and that feeling immediately becomes a fact to them. Not a belief, not an opinion, a fact. And when you arrive with your System 2 argument, your careful reasoning, your evidence, you are not speaking to their mind. You are threatening their nervous system. This is why you lose. Not because you are wrong. Not because your argument is weak. You lose because you are playing a game of logic against someone who is playing a game of survival. And survival always wins. The ego does not surrender to evidence. The ego doubles down. The ego finds new reasons, however absurd, to maintain its original position. And while you are burning through mental energy constructing your next perfectly reasoned counterpoint, they are spending zero energy simply refusing to move. They do not need to construct anything. They only need to resist. And resistance requires far less intelligence than construction. They will outlast you every single time, not by outsmarting you, but by exhausting you. By dragging the conversation into terrain so irrational, so emotionally turbulent, that your own thinking begins to deteriorate. You become reactive. You become frustrated. You start making the kind of imprecise statements that give them something to grab onto. And suddenly, the conversation has shifted entirely. Now, you are defending yourself. Now, you are the one who seems unreasonable. This is not an accident. This is the natural gravity of engaging with a foolish mind. It pulls everything down to its own level. Schopenhauer understood this with a clarity that most people in his era found offensive. He was not interested in being liked. He was interested in being free. Free from the cognitive drain of people who would never change. Free from the social obligation to pretend that every mind deserved equal engagement. Free from the exhausting performance of patience that intelligent people put on when dealing with those who have no intention of thinking carefully about anything. He called this out directly. He said that to engage with a fool is not an act of generosity. It is an act of self-destruction. And he was right. So what is the alternative? If logic fails, if patience fails, if evidence fails, what does the intelligent person actually do? This is where Schopenhauer's thinking becomes genuinely dangerous. Not dangerous in the sense of harmful, but dangerous in the sense that it cuts against everything you have been taught about how to treat people. You have been told to meet people where they are. You have been told to be the bigger person. You have been told that if you just explain yourself clearly enough, understanding will follow. Schopenhauer looked at all of that advice and dismissed it entirely. His answer was not to fight better. His answer was to stop fighting altogether, but to stop in a way that was so precise, so calculated, that the fool never even realized they had been neutralized. The first tool is what philosophers call reductio ad absurdum, but Schopenhauer used it in a way that went far beyond academic debate. The principle is simple. You do not attack someone's argument. You adopt it. You take their position and you agree with it completely, enthusiastically, almost aggressively. And then you follow it forward. You chase their logic to its natural conclusion, a conclusion so extreme, so obviously ridiculous, that the absurdity becomes impossible to ignore. But here is the genius of it. You are not the one pointing out the absurdity. They are. Because you have simply taken their idea seriously and asked where it leads. The fool, who never thinks more than one step ahead, suddenly finds themselves staring at the destination of their own reasoning, and it terrifies them. They backpedal. They introduce qualifications and exceptions that they would have mocked you for suggesting 5 minutes earlier. They begin, without realizing it, to argue against themselves. You have not defeated them. You have handed them the instrument of their own defeat and watched them use it. This requires something from you that is genuinely difficult. It requires that you completely surrender the desire to be seen as right. That desire, that deep intelligent person hunger for acknowledgement, for the moment when the other person looks at you and concedes, that is the leash they have around your neck. Every time you argue to win, every time you need them to admit you are correct, you give them power over you. You make your own emotional state dependent on the behavior of someone who is, by definition, not behaving rationally. Schopenhauer would find this almost comically self-defeating. You are a sophisticated instrument allowing yourself to be played by someone who cannot even read music. The second tool is distance. Not physical distance, though that helps, but psychological distance. A deliberately constructed gap between your authentic inner life and the surface you present during these interactions. Schopenhauer describes something like this in his concept of the porcupine dilemma. Porcupines in winter need warmth, so they move toward each other. But their quills draw blood, so they pull back. They find the precise distance at which they can share enough warmth to survive without causing each other injury. Intelligent people must develop this same precision in social environments. You cannot always avoid the foolish people in your life. They are embedded in your professional world, your family structure, your neighborhood. Avoidance is not always possible, and often not even desirable. What is possible is the construction of an avatar. The avatar is not a lie. It is a professional surface. It is the version of you that shows up to interactions where your real intelligence would be wasted or worse, weaponized against you. The avatar is agreeable without being substantive. It nods. It uses phrases that sound like engagement without actually conceding anything. Interesting point. I had not considered that angle. That is a perspective worth sitting with. These sentences give the fool the sensation of being heard, which is all they actually want, without giving them any real access to your thinking. Your real thinking remains behind glass, protected, conserved for environments where it will actually be used well. This is not cynicism, this is energy management at the highest level. Your cognitive resources are finite. Every serious thinker who has ever lived has understood this intuitively. The hours you spend trying to reason with someone who has decided not to be reasoned with are hours stolen from the work that actually matters, from the thinking that could produce something real, from the relationships where genuine intellectual exchange is possible. You are not being cold by protecting that resource. You are being responsible. You are being, in the truest sense of the word, intelligent about your intelligence. But there is a third layer to this, and it is the one that most people never reach because it requires the most radical shift in perspective. It is the layer where you stop seeing foolishness as a problem to be solved and start seeing it as information to be used. Every foolish person you encounter is showing you something. They are showing you exactly how they think, what they fear, what they need, what they will do when threatened. That is not a burden. That is data. And data, in the hands of someone who knows how to read it, is power. Schopenhauer was not simply a man who avoided fools. He was a man who studied them with the cold precision of an entomologist studying insects. He did not hate the insects. He simply had no illusions about their nature. And because he had no illusions, they could not surprise him. They could not manipulate him. They could not drain him. Because you can only be drained by something you are still hoping will be different than it is. The moment you fully accept that a particular person is not going to change, not because they are evil, but because they are simply not equipped, something remarkable happens inside you. The frustration dissolves, not immediately and not completely, but it begins to dissolve. Because frustration is the gap between what you expect and what you get. Close that gap by adjusting your expectations to match reality, and the frustration has nowhere to live. You stop being angry at the rain for being wet. You simply bring an umbrella. This sounds passive. It is not. It is one of the most active, disciplined psychological achievements a person can accomplish. It requires you to override your own ego, the part of you that insists the world should operate according to the rules of reason, the part that takes it personally when it does not. Killing that part of your ego, or at least quieting it, is the real work. Everything else, the reductio ad absurdum, the avatar, the psychological distance, those are tactics. This is the strategy. This is the foundation everything else rests on. Because here is what no one tells you about dealing with foolish people. The real damage they do is not in the individual conversations. The real damage is cumulative. It is what happens to your mind over months and years of sustained exposure to irrational thinking. Cognitive load theory is precise about this. Your brain has a fixed bandwidth for processing information. When you are forced to navigate the chaotic, unpredictable landscape of a foolish person's psychology, your brain works overtime. You are constantly trying to anticipate their next irrational move. You are suppressing your own emotional responses. You are translating their feelings into something resembling logic so you can respond to them. All of that costs something. And the bill comes due in the form of degraded decision-making, reduced creativity, shortened patience, and a slow erosion of the sharp, clear thinking that is your most valuable asset. The fool does not steal your time, they steal your mind, gradually, invisibly, but with devastating consistency. Schopenhauer protected himself from this with what people in his time called misanthropy, and what we might now recognize as ruthless intentionality about his mental environment. He was not interested in being universally liked. He was interested in preserving the conditions under which genuine thought was possible. He understood that your intellectual environment is not just the books you read or the ideas you expose yourself to. It is the people you allow sustained access to your attention. And attention, real deep focused attention, is the rarest and most valuable thing a thinking person possesses. Guard it accordingly, not with hostility, not with arrogance, but with the quiet, unapologetic firmness of someone who knows exactly what they are protecting and exactly why it matters. There is one final thing that Schopenhauer understood about this entire dynamic, something that ties everything together and reframes the whole challenge in a way that is genuinely liberating. He understood that the goal was never to change the fool. It was never to educate them, correct them, or bring them around to a more accurate understanding of reality. Those were always false objectives dressed up as noble ones. The real goal, the only goal that was ever actually within your control, was to preserve your own clarity, to move through a world full of irrational, ego-driven, evidence-resistant people without becoming one of them, without letting their chaos colonize your thinking, without sacrificing your capacity for genuine reason on the altar of a social dynamic that was never going to reward it anyway. That is the genius that Schopenhauer modelled and that history's most formidable minds have always practiced. Not the genius of winning every argument, not the genius of being recognized as the smartest person in the room, but the quiet, invisible, almost frightening genius of knowing when not to play, of seeing the game for exactly what it is, smiling slightly, and directing your energy somewhere that will actually compound. The fool walks away thinking they won. Let them. You already moved on. You are already 3 levels deeper into a thought they will never have access to. That is not arrogance. That is the natural consequence of protecting your mind with the same seriousness that you would protect anything else of extraordinary value. The world will always have more fools than geniuses. That ratio is not going to change. What can change is your relationship to that reality. You can spend your life being drained by it, frustrated by it, diminished by it. Or you can do what Schopenhauer did. You can look at it clearly, without illusion, without sentimentality, and without the naive hope that this time will be different. You can build your walls, not out of bitterness, but out of wisdom. You can learn to move through crowds of lesser thinking without absorbing it. You can master the art of being fully present in body and entirely sovereign in mind. And you can reserve the full weight of your intelligence for the rare precious moments and people that are actually worthy of it. That is not isolation. That is not cruelty. That is the highest form of self-respect available to a thinking person in a world that rarely rewards thinking. Schopenhauer did not die bitter, he died clear, and clarity, in the end, is the only victory that actually lasts.